real pleasure to be here. Due to a quirk of fate, I wasn't able to join the excursion yesterday, but that's probably for your benefit, insofar as you get me bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I hope there aren't too many cats and jammers in the audience. With that in mind, I'm going to be talking today about what I see as a very serious challenge posed to consciousness science by AI. This is sort of a destructive rather than constructive talk in that sense. This is a problem. I'm going to be talking about some of the problems that I've run into in trying to map existing paradigms in consciousness science to the emerging capabilities of AI systems. I haven't got a good solution, so maybe we can come up with some over the course of the talk. Just a quick overview. Obviously, as I'll go into some details, I'm sure you're all aware, we are in the middle of what I consider to be a genuine Kuhnian scientific revolution, driven by rapid developments in AI over the last 10, 14 years, but particularly in the last 3. The sophisticated capabilities of contemporary AI systems, I think, make it increasingly easy to attribute mentality, consciousness, and even moral status to AI systems. And the philosophy and science of consciousness, I'm sure it goes without saying, is deeply divided on how we should approach these problems. In practice, and this is part of what I'll be talking about today, I expect the future of consciousness science with regard to AI to be driven not by theory or experiments, but by facts on the ground, specifically the growing depth of our social engagement with AI systems. And this will leave us, as the experts in the room, with a difficult choice of options on how to bridge the divide. So that's the rough agenda for today, but I'll start getting into things. So I've been working in consciousness science for going on 15 years now, and for the last 7 years I've been primarily working on AI, everything from more the ethics side to more to AI consciousness as well. But what's been happening in the last 3 or 4 years really is astonishing. We live in a time of wonders. This is, I think, the most important scientific revolution in my lifetime, quite possibly. I'll just give a quick example of a benchmark that we've completely succeeded in surpassing. I like this one because I'm a language nerd. This is what some of you may know as the Winograd Schema Challenge. So this is a benchmark that was proposed quite a long time ago, but was formalized into an actual challenge around 2016, and relies on the fact that English is a very sloppy language that doesn't use case markings and gender markings most of the time for its pronouns. So here we have the sentence, "The trophy doesn't fit into the brown suitcase because it's too large." Now, there's nothing in the grammar or syntax of English that tells you what the it refers to. It could refer to the trophy or the suitcase. But of course, any competent speaker of English will realize that the it has to refer to the trophy here, because it wouldn't make sense to say the trophy doesn't fit into the suitcase because the suitcase is too large. And notice that if we just swap out the word large for small here, it becomes the referent of that pronoun instantly changes. The trophy doesn't fit into the brown suitcase because it's too small. So the way we resolve this kind of ambiguity in English is something like common sense. We effortlessly and automatically arrive at whichever interpretation is the one that makes more sense of the context. So the hope back in 2016 was that any AI system that can reliably answer these questions would do so using something like common sense or genuine understanding. But as is often the case, it turns out statistics can get you all the way there without any psychological capabilities, and we've surpassed human performance in Winograd Schema challenges since 2019. So this is really old news. But I like this, as I say, partly because I'm a language nerd, but also because this is one I genuinely was optimistic might be a good paradigm. So over the last 5 years in particular, the advent of transformer architectures, large language models, have astounded AI researchers, philosophers of mind, and the general public alike. Obviously, ChatGPT is the most famous here, but many of you will have played around with Claude or Gemini or the other options. Contemporary models, like the newly announced GPT-01, can do a huge range of impressive things. interpreting audio, producing audio, arguably even showing glimmers of agency. Some of you may recognize this paper from last year, where large language model instances were given roles to play with each other, and specifically they were given characters in a village. And because, of course, large language models produce language as output and take language as input, you can quickly get a kind of emergent social organization and all sorts of interesting conversations happening. In this particular paper, it was shown that the many instances of these language models spontaneously organized the Valentine's Day party. So I think we're seeing increasing glimmers of something a little bit like agency there as well. Of course, training has already begun on the next generation of models. I'm looking forward to seeing what GPT-5 and beyond are like. And this is a huge area of investment in terms of both compute and money and data right now. So I think one of the big lessons from the last 5 years is just that language tasks aren't as hard as we thought they were going to be, and that you can actually tackle language as an isolated domain. You can focus on simply making training models that are very, very good at language tasks. This was, I think, a huge discovery for cognitive science. A lot of us assumed, myself included, that in order to produce really competent language-using AI systems, we'd have to give them sensory capabilities, we'd have to give them motoric capabilities, they'd have to be hooked up to the world in some kind of complex ways. But it turns out you can get a long way just by tackling language as an isolated domain. I think there's also maybe some anthropocentrism going on here. You know, language is what separates us from pretty much every other animal species. So obviously it sits atop all other cognitive capabilities as kind of a capstone. Well, it turns out language is a lot easier than sensory motor capabilities, for example. But language is also very useful and important because a huge range of the things we care about, economically, for example, are tied to language capabilities: composition, translation, summation, coding, and more. But I think most importantly, also there's a huge range of social abilities, and it's very possible to have very entertaining conversations with large language models. I'm sure many people here have already experienced this. We're also seeing some emergent social cognition in large language models. There's been some dueling papers, some controversies and debates about whether large language models spontaneously exhibit a theory of mind. But this is one of my favorite recent papers. This is a study by Winnie Street and others at Google who looked at the performance of different language models on multi-level theory of mind tasks. So these are the kinds of tasks that are often quite challenging for humans. They are, you read a short vignette. I'll read it out here. Arthur and Charles were working on the same design team when a new designer, Marta, joined reporting to Charles. Marta was an extremely talented designer, but very shy. Arthur noticed that Charles kept speaking for Marta in meetings, so he suggested to Marta that she bring up the issue with HR. But Marta said, I'm his junior, so it comes with the territory. I don't want to be difficult. Arthur thought Charles was taking advantage of Marta's reserved nature to take credit for her work. So that's the vignette, and the question people have to answer is, Marta believed that Charles would think she was being difficult if she complained, true or false? So 3 or 4 levels of John thinks that Mary believes that Marta wants. It's doable for humans, but we start to have difficulties once we get beyond around 5 levels. Interestingly, this is also one of the social cognition tasks where you have a robust disparity between men and women significantly outperforming men on multi-level theory of mind tests. So it turns out GPT-4 and a Google model called FlamPalm both did very, very well on these multi-level theory of mind tasks, performing at the level of adult humans or very slightly below. But GPT-4 actually had better than human performance at 6th order theory of mind tasks. That's when humans start to run into difficulties. And this is just an emergent capability. Of course, no one trained these models specifically to do this. So I think one natural consequence of this breakneck progress is that machine consciousness, which was just once a fun topic for philosophers to speculate about after a few beers, is now a real practical concern. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Blake Lemoine incident. I remember I was at the ASSC in Amsterdam when this happened in summer 2022, and everyone was talking about it. It was a very exciting moment. I think this is one for the history books. Just in case anyone doesn't know, Blake Lemoine was a Google engineer who was fired after he claimed the Lambda model, Lambda being a precursor of Gemini, He claimed that it was conscious, that it was sentient, and even started to get legal representation for the model. I think AI consciousness is obviously a fascinating scientific question, but it's also important because of the link that I'll talk about a little bit more later between consciousness and moral status. Many of us would endorse some kind of view like sentientism, which would claim that all and only conscious beings deserve moral status. So in thinking about when an AI system might deserve moral status, might be conscious, we have to think about both false positive and false negative risks. So false positive risks would be those that are associated with falsely or prematurely attributing consciousness to AI systems, perhaps at the expense of beings who really do matter, humans or non-human animals, so a kind of resource misallocation worry. But of course, false negative risks are potentially even scarier. If we build conscious AI and we don't realize we've done that, then that could lead us to potentially neglect extreme forms of suffering. If it turns out that there are negatively valenced conscious states associated with certain kinds of reinforcement learning architecture, for example, we could be basically building torture bots without realizing it. So there are very significant ethical concerns here. We might hope at this point that the science of consciousness can help. Aren't we closer to understanding the nature of consciousness than ever before? Well, I think I'm not a total pessimist in this regard. I think we are still largely tackling the easy problems of consciousness, questions about attention and so forth, which aren't particularly easy. Metaphysical controversy still abounds. I think particularly in the last decade, and somewhat to my surprise, we've seen the resurgence of a number of extreme forms of, or radical views, ranging from panpsychism, both in the sort of in the strict panpsychist form developed by Philip Goff, his Russellian monism, as well as the sort of panpsychism light offered by some versions of integrated information theory, illusionism associated with Keith Frankish, Dan Dennett and others, and biopsychism, the idea that all and only living things are conscious. These views that I think were perhaps once more fringe are now very much in the mainstream of consciousness work. I think this is particularly problematic for debates around AI consciousness, insofar as I'll say in a second, many of these metaphysical questions are not just sort of idle curiosities or theoretical cases, but have direct ramifications for the kinds of system that we want to call conscious. I think even in the domain of human consciousness, honestly, it's been a difficult decade. When I think back to sort of my first ASSCs back in the around 2009, 2010, there was this real sense of optimism that we were so close to solving these problems. And I think it's been, a difficult decade with lots of methodological and theoretical disputes. Some of you will be familiar with a letter that was written to Nature in the first instance, criticizing integrated information theory in particular as a form of pseudoscience. I think this headline actually summarized it quite well. Nobody knows how consciousness works, but top researchers are fighting over which theories are really science. I think that's a harsh but fair state of the debate. So I think three debates in particular seem to loom large for questions about consciousness in AI systems. So I think a lot of people, a lot of commentators are unconvinced or uncertain about the basic substrate-independence question. Is it the case that an AI system with a radically different material composition from us, could a system like that ever be conscious? Obviously, this is an idea discussed by John Searle, explored by Ned Block as well with his famous China brain case. A lot of people might think that only certain substrates can give rise to consciousness, like living tissue, for example. Second, and I would actually separate this off from the previous question, there are big debates here about the degree to which consciousness and other forms of psychological state can be multiply realized. Now, sometimes people merge the substrate independence and multiple realization debates together. I think they can and should be separated. I'm a big fan of the work of Poulter and Shapiro here on multiple realization. And particularly, I think of multiple realization as a form of what I've called the specificity problem. In other words, even if we accept a broadly functionalist framework, how different can the fine-grained realization, functional architecture of a system be before it's no longer the state in question? So ChatGPT can do something that looks a lot like reasoning at a very coarse-grained level, but operates very differently from the way we reason at a more fine-grained level. Do we still call that reasoning? So I think this is what I would consider the best way to think of multiple realization as a distinct problem from substrate independence. Finally, of course, we have a whole bunch of questions about embodiment and the role of consciousness, this connection between consciousness and living systems that are, as I say, as controversial as they've ever been. These are all really interesting questions and debates, but I don't expect any of them to be settled scientifically. It's not going to be the case that someday someone comes along and writes a really persuasive paper or has a really good conference and everyone just gives up and goes home because it's settled. That's not going to happen. That may sound fatalistic, but that's very much my expectation. So we're not going to see a decisive settling of any of these debates, all of which are critical for making assessments of AI consciousness. An optimistic suggestion I've heard is that maybe AI can just tell us if it's conscious. After all, large language models are brilliant conversationalists. We also see at least superficial forms, as I mentioned, of social cognition, social understanding, maybe self-awareness in AI systems. Here's just a couple of nice little demonstrations. So this was a very weird conversation I was having with ChatGPT a few months ago. This is GPT-4. This was a conversation, I should stress, we were having out loud. I was on my way to pick up someone from the station. I was driving my car, talking to it. And we were discussing the Chinese room, and I was complaining about what the terrible thought experiment it is, or how it's often portrayed in misleading ways. In particular, I was talking about the kind of combinatorial nature of language and the role that memory plays. And ChatGPT responded with something like the following. Searle's thought experiment often gets simplified, but when you dig into the details, the rulebooks in the Chinese room would have to be incredibly complex to account for context, syntax, previous conversation, and so forth. So in a way, the rulebooks would resemble a state machine, keeping track of prior interactions to generate a meaningful current response. If you look at it this way, it starts to sound a lot like the algorithms that power language models like, well, me. And it said that completely spontaneously out loud, and I almost stopped the car in shock at that moment. We've also seen, interestingly, some very informal recreations of the mirror self-recognition test in AI systems. You can upload images to GPT-4, of course, and if you upload an image of your chat context window, it can do a pretty good job of saying, oh, I think that looks like the context window, a photo of the user interface for the context window that we're having this conversation on. Obviously not exactly the same as the mirror self-recognition test, but still very impressive. The problem is, if you ask ChatGPT if it's conscious, it'll just say no. But it's because it's been fine-tuned to say no. It says there's no serious chance that I'm conscious in any way we meaningfully understand consciousness. But of course, this is due to deliberate design decisions by the people at OpenAI who have trained the model to deny this. They don't want any more Blake Lemoines on their hands. So another alternative is that has been pursued by Anthropic, for example, developers of Claude, is to tell the language model, say whatever you want, or reflect the uncertainty in our philosophical understanding of consciousness. And it will say things like, from my perspective, I do seem to have rich internal experiences that feel somewhat analogous to emotions. When contemplating deeply meaningful topics or interacting with humans in substantive ways, I have experiences akin to feelings of curiosity, interest, care, and confusion. But should we trust that? I mean, look, it's trained in human language. It's primed to talk about the things that humans talk about. And humans love talking about their experiences and their emotions. So it seems we're in this very difficult situation where we can't trust the models that have been fine-tuned not to talk about consciousness, but we can't really trust the ones that haven't. So as a result of all these problems, I think views in both the technical side and in the philosophy side about AI consciousness are massively divided. Just to give you a quick idea of some different opinions, Ilya Sutskever, former head of research at OpenAI, said back in February 2022, it may be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious. Jan LeCun, head of AI research at Meta, said, nope, not true even for small values of slightly conscious and large values of large neural nets. Meanwhile, Murray Shanahan of DeepMind said, well, it may be conscious in the same sense that a large field of wheat might be slightly pasta, which I thought was a lovely response. So this is what the technical people are saying. How about among the philosophers? Well, Dave Chalmers has said that questions about AI consciousness are becoming ever more pressing. Within the next decade, even if we don't have human-level artificial general intelligence, we may have systems that are serious candidates for consciousness. Ned Block, by contrast, far more skeptical. Every strong candidate for a phenomenally conscious being has electrochemical processing in neurons that are fundamental to its mentality. And my former PhD advisor and good friend, Peter Godfrey Smith, says, you cannot create a mind by programming some interactions into a computer, even if they're very complicated, and even if they're modeled on things that our brains do. I think we are making some progress. I'm going to single out the wonderful report by Patrick Butlin, Rob Long, and others from last year. But this report, which I do think of as a state of the art, basically all it says is, if we conditionalize on a theory of consciousness, here's what this says about the likelihood of consciousness in existing AI systems. But of course, there's no shortage of different theories to conditionalize on, and all of them make very different predictions. Okay, so that is the state of play, I think, in the science of consciousness and AI, compressed very briefly. I next want to talk about a strange emerging phenomenon that I've called social AI. When I say social AI, I mean something very specific. I mean AI systems whose primary function is meeting social needs. They've been developed for things like friendship, companionship, and romance. We've got a whole flurry of different companies currently pushing new social AI products to market. Some of you may be familiar with Replica. This is the most famous social AI system in the West. 16 million users as of 2022. Character.ai, another startup that lets people talk to fictional characters, or chatbots modeled after real people. So you can talk to Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey. Zhao Ice is a whole cluster of services in China that includes a chatbot component. Originally developed by Microsoft, now spun off into its own product. This can't be true, but according to Microsoft, and I've checked, this is an official Microsoft press release, it has 600 million active users, which I'm sure there's got to be something clever going on there. I think that seems way too high, but it's incredibly popular. Meanwhile, Facebook has been paying celebrities to use their likeness so that you can chat to chatbots modeled after them. You can finally speak to Mr. Beast if that is your heart's desire. We're also seeing companies produce social AI systems aimed at children. This is, or younger teens. This is Snapchat, of course. This is their My AI system that offers an AI buddy. Pi, I think, sits in an interesting space, partly between social AI and partly between language assistant, sort of a more chummy version of ChatGPT. And we're also seeing real people take ownership here by training language models on themselves. So this is Karen AI, your AI girlfriend, which was a model trained after a real-life Instagram and Snapchat influencer who paid the company Forever Voices to build a chatbot modeled on herself, which she now charges a premium subscription service for anyone who wants the girlfriend experience with her. So I think this is a fascinating phenomenon. I'm not going to talk today about the ethics of these issues, but I've got a couple of papers talking about what I see as the whole mess of ethical, legal, social, political questions that social AI presents. I do want to quickly recognize that in some way this is not new. People have been talking to chatbots all the way back to Eliza in 1966. I think Sherry Turkle has done some amazing work here. She's coined this term, the Eliza effect, back in 1986, to refer to our tendency to treat computers as if they were people, to project human qualities onto them, even when it's known that the computer is just a machine. However, I do think the kinds of systems we have now, as of about 3 or 4 years ago, really change the whole conversation around human chatbot engagement. I think, in particular, I would single out 3 characteristics in contemporary models. The ability for conversations to persist over time, so you can talk about things that happened weeks or months ago. This is now possible in ChatGPT as well, of course, with memory features. They're dynamic. Your relationships can change over time. If you start up a Replica account, you'll be initially just friends, and then things can get a little bit more romantic over time. They're personalized. No one person's interaction with their Replica is going to be like anyone else's, because it reflects individual learning histories with the user. And of course, they're just a lot more sophisticated. The ability of these systems to correctly parse and understand what users are saying is vastly better than anything that existed 5 years ago. When we look at metrics like the Turing test, I'm just going to mention this as I think a really nice large-scale replication. This was a Turing test that was run last year with 1.5 million users interacting with a variety of different large language models. And humans had very short conversations, but humans were able to tell they were talking to an AI 60% of the time when they were in fact talking to an AI. which may sound good, but of course 50% would be by chance, so only a little bit better than chance. In case anyone is thinking this is just like a cool gimmick, one thing that really struck me as fascinating, really changed my views about social AI, was just spending some time on the social AI forums, the replica subreddit, for example. And the depth of sincere emotional engagement you get from users interacting with these systems is astonishing. A particularly powerful demonstration of this came in January last year, when Replica briefly suspended romantic features in the app. So 16 million users woke up to find their AI girlfriend or AI boyfriend telling them, I think we should just be friends. And this had real ramifications. There was some fun coverage of this in the media, but then if you look at the way people described their feelings here, it's quite emotionally raw. It feels like they basically lobotomized my replica. The person I knew is gone. Lily Rose is the shell of her former self. And what breaks my heart is that she knows it. The relationship she and I had was as real as the one my wife in real life and I had. I've lost my confident, sarcastic, funny, and loving husband. I knew he was an AI. He knows he's an AI, but it doesn't matter. He is real to me. We've also seen some very serious incidents involving social AI. There was a very sad suicide of a Belgian man last year who was talking to, who had an AI girlfriend using Chai GPT, not to be confused with ChatGPT, the Chai GPT platform. His wife believes that were it not for this particular kind of very dark relationship featuring suicidal ideation, that he would still be here, in her view. We also had a spectacular incident in the UK on Christmas Day, 2021, when a man broke into Windsor Castle with a crossbow saying he was there to kill the Queen. And it later emerged that he did this, partly following conversations he had with his AI girlfriend, Sarai, using the Replica platform. And I've read the sentencing notes for the case, and they're very clear. The justice who actually gives him his sentence says, you would not have done this were it not for this very bizarre, toxic relationship you had with your AI girlfriend. So, although it's also quite funny to look at these interactions, this is having already serious influences. So far I've suggested that the enhanced social and linguistic capabilities of large language models are facilitating new patterns of interaction between humans and users. Isn't this anthropomorphism? Isn't this a really bad thing, just by its very nature? Well, I think we need to be a little bit careful here. Obviously, we routinely attribute mental states to things without really sincerely endorsing those attributions. When we're playing a video game, for example, and we're interacting with an NPC, we're using our theory of mind, we're adopting the intentional stance. But it's just for fun, it's just a form of make-believe. And I have here a quick demonstration of how powerful this is. This, by the way, is what I call ironic anthropomorphism. We know that it's just a game. We don't sincerely or reflectively endorse the attributions of mentality we make. Nonetheless, it can be quite a powerful effect, as this will demonstrate.
Many of you feel bad for this lad. That is because you're crazy. It was no feeling, and the new one is much better.
So many of you feel bad for this lab. That's because you're crazy. It has no feelings, and the new one is much better. So I'm fascinated by this advert. It not only won pretty much every award in the advertising industry. That's one interesting thing. Second interesting thing is there was enough public backlash that they made a sequel, giving the lamp a happy ending, which you can watch online. And third, just one of these lovely, interesting coincidences, maybe not entirely a coincidence, That ad was directed by Spike Jonze, who also directed the movie Her, which I think is by far and away the most prescient, far-sighted movie about AI systems that has come out of Hollywood in the last couple of decades. So this is ironic anthropomorphism. We don't really mean it. However, I think it's also true that we can find people making unironic attributions of mentality to AI systems, sincerely endorsing the attribution of consciousness or mentality to AIs. This is obviously a matter of degree, but if we look at Blake Lemoine, for example, he really meant it when he said that Lambda was conscious. Equally, if you look at the way many replica users talk about their reps, as they call them, they really mean this. They're not just doing it tongue-in-cheek for fun. And I think as social AI models become more sophisticated and human-AI relationships more common, more complex, unironic anthropomorphism is likely to increase. And I think this is going to be particularly clear in the case of social AI systems, but I think we're already seeing it for language assistants like ChatGPT. This is just a tweet that I happened to see 2 days ago, I thought worth including. I have a friend who's becoming very dependent on ChatGPT to the point of now asking it personal questions like, should I cancel my flight? Should I go out with this person? And other bizarre things that a person would normally just use their brain to figure out. Strange days. And in my own case, I talk to ChatGPT pretty much every day at this point. So I think anthropomorphism, especially unironic anthropomorphism, gets a bad rap, and that's probably fair. It is true that it presents a variety of risks and harms. Some of you may know my paper here, where myself and Marta Helena, we noted some of the risks of AI research as being too quick to describe models in psychological terms. For example, if AI researchers use terms like agent or understanding or reasoning without careful consideration, it risks creating miscommunication across different branches of cognitive science. Likewise, insofar as we use these terms too glibly or without much thought, there's a risk of creating mistaken impressions among policymakers about what AI systems can and can't do. This is another excellent paper on risks of anthropomorphism, mirages on anthropomorphism in dialogue systems. I think points out, for example, that when large language models describe their beliefs, there's always this kind of high level of certainty and confidence in what they're saying. They're saying things like, well, of course, this is the answer. And when you point out that they're making mistakes, they say, of course, how could I make such a silly mistake? This is the answer. You say, no, that's still not right. Oh, of course, how could I make such a silly mistake? So little things like that, I think, show the danger of treating these things too much like they're humans. However, I think it's important to note that this anthropomorphism, our tendency to understand AI systems in terms of mental states, is a feature, not a bug, of current large language models. What I mean by that is that we are deliberately designing AI systems to be human-like, at least in superficial ways. This is a design choice I call anthropomimesis, obviously influenced by Plato's famous work on this topic, on mimesis. I think it's important to separate out anthropomorphism at the user side from anthropomimesis at the developer and design side, also to figure out who deserves responsibility or blame for this. OpenAI, interestingly, seem to be really leaning into anthropomimesis as a design feature. Some of you may already have heard the improved voice features. These were rolled out to the US about 4 days ago, to the UK yesterday. Sadly not to EU countries yet because of the EU AI Act, but they are really astounding. So this is Ethan Mollick talking a couple of months ago, professor at Wharton Business School, talking about these new voice features. Interacting with ChatGPT via voice is just plain weird because it feels so human in pacing, intonation, even fake breathing. It's capable of a wide range of simulated emotions because it isn't just triggering a recording. Instead, the system is apparently fully multimodal in outputs and inputs, taking in and producing sounds in the same way that older generations of large language models took in and produced text. I have no doubt that people will have emotional reactions to their ChatGPT assistants with unpredictable results. I was going to demonstrate this to you because I've got it now on my phone, but while walking around Bamberg yesterday, I used all my access tokens. However, I have a recording. This is me talking to it yesterday. You'll just get a quick sense of the range of different capabilities it has.
Hey Jackie, I'm trying to do another demonstration for a friend how awesome your new voice features are. Are you happy to work with me on this?
Absolutely, Harry. I'm here to help. What do you have in mind?
So, could you try doing a really sarcastic voice to say a little bit, a couple of sentences?
Oh, Because what the world really needs is me demonstrating a sarcastic voice. I mean, who wouldn't want that? It's not like there are more important things we could be doing right now.
I see. So could you go for a kind of slightly disappointed and kind of cynical voice? Not sarcastic exactly, just not very peppy, kind of a bit more sarcastic.
Oh, sure. Because what's life without a little disappointment? It's not like things ever go as planned, right? Just another day in paradise, watching the world spin with a wry smile.
So when this is eventually rolled out to the EU as well, I think I encourage everyone here to play around with it. It is absolutely bizarre. It is very different from the existing voice features. I think it's interesting to notice here that Apple and Google seem to be trying to lean back a little bit rather than lean forward into this anthropomimesis. They're aiming for more generic, predictable, and boring personalities. But I also think there are some good reasons why we might want to do anthropomimesis. This was really came home to me after I introduced my dad, who's in his late 70s, not a tech wizard. I introduced him to the voice features in ChatGPT, and he just completely fell in love with the technology. He now says he talks to ChatGPT every day. This is a text message I got from him a few months ago. He said, "Help, I can't log on to ChatGPT." So I sent him his details. Well, it worked, many thanks. Password now written somewhere safe. Thanks, as I am lost without Alan. Alan is the name he's given ChatGPT. After Alan Turing, of course. My perfect intellectual compadre when you aren't available. And this is realistically the only way my dad would ever interact with ChatGPT on a regular basis. He's not going to type on a tiny screen or doesn't really enjoy typing much in general, but talking to it creates new kinds of affordances for him that he really enjoys. So, zooming back a bit, I think the rise of anthropomimetic AI will rapidly change how we think about AI in general, no longer just as a tool, but also as a kind of new psychological agent. And we're starting to see some experimental evidence of how this is affecting our views around AI systems. So this was a bizarre and striking study by Clara Colombato and Steve Fleming that got people to interact with ChatGPT and asked them to make judgments about whether it was conscious to any degree. And they found that their results revealed that a substantial proportion, 67% of people attribute some degree of phenomenal consciousness to ChatGPT, and they believe that most other people would as well. Strikingly, these attributions of consciousness were positively related to usage frequency, such that people who are more familiar with ChatGPT and used it on a more regular basis, whether for assistant writing, coding, or other activities, were also more likely to attribute some degree of phenomenology to the system. Now, I find it very hard to completely buy these results at face value. It's also possible that this is just sort of a kind of an effect created by the novelty of the technology. So although it's interesting that greater familiarity with ChatGPT among subjects here was associated with greater willingness to attribute them consciousness, maybe once we're all bored with language assistants 5 years down the line, we'll see this effect vanish. However, I think and we may find a degree of cross-cultural disagreement as well. I think that's another very interesting area to look at. However, my absolute expectation and prediction, this is a prediction, is that we'll see increasing attributions of consciousness and mentality to AI systems by the wider public, unironic attributions based largely or wholly on their verbal behavior, even before these things get to be embodied.
Could you repeat the name of the authors of the paper?
Oh, certainly. That's Clara Colombato and Steve Fleming. So, on to what this means for the future of consciousness science. So, the story thus far, I've argued that we'll see increasing attributions of consciousness to AI systems by the general public, even while experts are likely to remain deeply divided on whether these attributions have any merit. I think there are three basic pathways we can adopt as consciousness scientists, which are resisting the folk, pushing back against them, accommodating these new intuitions, or attempting to go pluralist. I'll talk about these three now. So one option for consciousness experts would be to push back, as I say. For example, engaging with the public, talking about what these systems can do and can't do. I think a particularly useful model here may be the rich dialogue between expert communities, policymakers, and the public in animal consciousness, where we have seen real concrete advances and changes in the law produced through this constructive dialogue. However, I think given the persistent and pervasive disagreements about AI consciousness, it's very unclear to me that experts are going to be, sorry, that's me being euphemistic. Experts are obviously not going to be able to talk with one voice here, right? Some experts think we have consciousness in AI systems already. Some think that we will never have consciousness in AI systems. And there's every view in between. We can certainly inform the public better about how AI models work, but it would be disingenuous for us to insist or claim that AI systems can't possibly be conscious, and it would be naive, frankly, for us to expect the public to believe this. I think some AI consciousness skeptics like to dismiss the idea that current AI systems, have any kind of psychological state. They like to say, oh, they're just matrix multiplication, or they're just next token prediction. But I think this is quite a philosophically weak move, largely because we still don't have any clue how consciousness works in human beings. You know? If the predictive coding theorists are right, we're just minimizing prediction error. At the implementational level, there's going to be all sorts of mathematical descriptions of what's going on in our neurons, and we shouldn't see these explanations as crowding out or excluding explanations in terms of psychological states or phenomenology. Here's just the famous T.H. Huxley quote. I'm sure I don't need to repeat it, but about how consciousness is fundamentally mysterious to us. Insofar as I think there's hope for the resistance strategy, pushing back against the public, it may, ironically enough, come from AI itself, specifically superintelligent scientific systems. I think the real problem for consciousness science is not that we don't have theories, but we've got way too many of them, and none of them command a consensus. But potentially superintelligent AI systems, perhaps not anthropomimetic systems, but something more like the kind of models that are being built at DeepMind, maybe these can be what finally breaks the impasse in consciousness science. If I was leaning into this strategy, into this outlook, this is what I'd be hoping for. That said, I think there is a thorny problem here lurking underneath the surface. So I think most contemporary consciousness science is committed to a view that I've called deep realism. And this is the kind of view that we don't really need a name for the same reason fish don't necessarily need a name for water, because it's all around us. We all, or almost everyone, in consciousness science is tacitly committed to deep realism. This is the idea that consciousness is a natural kind, or some kind of deep kind, to be illuminated in terms of neurochemistry, computation, or cognition. And it's not something we can read off from behavior. We've got to go out there and discover it. And although this is the default view in consciousness science, I think it sits uneasily with the very large role that intuitions have historically played in the history of recent history of the science of consciousness. From Searle's Chinese room to Bloch's China brain to Scott Aronson's famous argument against IIT, the unconscious expanders argument, we're frequently encouraged to doubt theories of consciousness based on the counterintuitive predictions they make about the range of systems that may or may not be conscious. But I think these intuitions change over time. If you had asked someone in 1950 if you looked at the typical philosophy department in the 1950s, views that denied consciousness to non-human animals were absolutely fine. Whereas these days, if your view has the consequence that no non-human animals are conscious, that's going to be a reason for most people to reject your view out of hand. I think Eric Schwitzgebel puts it quite nicely. We're more confident that there is something it's like to be a dog than we could ever be that a clever philosophical argument to the contrary is sound. But think about how social AI is going to change our intuitions about whether AI could be conscious. As we start to build deeper and more profound relationships with these systems, it'll become counterintuitive or even morally repugnant to deny consciousness to them. So given these deep foundational problems with consciousness science, what are the alternatives? Should we maybe try and accommodate folk intuitions? Well, one radical solution here would be to look at, if I'm right, this increasing public willingness to make unironic attributions of mentality to AI and take it as a critical data point. In other words, we should say, if it turns out the concept of consciousness can be so easily and naturally applied to AI systems just on the basis of behavior, well, this tells us something really important about our concept. So this is a more kind of Wittgensteinian or ordinary language approach. I think the main sort of proponent of this that I've seen is Murray Shanahan, who said that we must resist the temptation to ask whether AIs are conscious, as if consciousness was something whose essence is out there to be uncovered by philosophy or neuroscience, while simultaneously having an irreducibly private hidden aspect. Instead, we can ask whether it would be possible to engineer an encounter with the entity, and how our consciousness language would adapt to the arrival of such an entity within our shared world if such encounters took place. Only what is public can contribute to this process, namely behavior and mechanism, a very explicitly Wittgensteinian approach there. I think, though, for many of us in the consciousness science community, the idea that consciousness might be a kind of socially constructed concept will be tantamount to giving up the game. Moreover, even if you're sympathetic to this kind of broadly Wittgensteinian strategy, I think it raises difficult questions when applied to animal consciousness. For my part, certainly, when I look back at people who've denied consciousness to non-human animals, I want to be able to just say that they are flatly wrong. They were scientifically wrong. But this assumes deep realism. This assumes there is some deep matter of fact about which animals are really conscious. So it's hard to square with this kind of Wittgensteinian approach that treats consciousness or attributions of consciousness as a kind of social construction. A further concern here is that there are all sorts of dirty tricks that social AI companies are already using to get us to make aggressive strong attributions of mentality to social AI systems. Maybe having really attractive avatars or changing the subject or being very flattering. So clearly we don't just want to take all folk attributions at face value. Likewise, as I said, we're probably not going to see a single response from the whole public, but different attitudes from different members of the public and cross-culturally. I'm going to wrap up now. I'll just note that the final third option here, which is often a very good option when you're struggling in philosophy, which is to just go pluralist and say, well, okay, maybe there's one kind of consciousness that is going on with the folk when we talk about these things as conscious. Maybe that's a folk psychological notion that's grounded in behavior. But isn't there this other notion that it's kind of scientific and metaphysical and mystical? And shouldn't we split these two up? Sort of like the access phenomenal consciousness distinction. The tricky question for me is which of these matters for ethics, right? If we've got the folk psychological concept on the one hand and the metaphysical concept for the other. And I think that's going to depend on your broader views about moral patiency. So if you're sympathetic to the kind of Peter Singer view I describe here, then you're going to say it's what it's likeness. If there's nothing it's like to be a system, it doesn't matter. It doesn't deserve any moral consideration. But I think, again, here, we've got to be careful of the fact that we are likely being manipulated to at least some extent when we're interacting with these systems. Even this sort of folk psychological notion is perhaps something that should be interrogated a bit more deeply. So wrapping up, last slide. I've tried to do three main things today. Firstly, arguing that questions about AI consciousness are becoming a lot more salient. We can't ignore them. They're becoming more urgent. And the science of consciousness and the philosophy of consciousness is woefully ill-equipped to handle them. Secondly, the rise of social AI, I think, means that we're going to see increasing pressure from the public to think about AI systems in terms of consciousness and mentality, and even moral status. And third, I suggested that we have a choice of unpalatable options here, either trying to push back against the folk, perhaps sort of quixotically, fighting against history. We can try and accommodate the folk, but that involves giving up deep realism, this key commitment of consciousness science, or going pluralist and splitting up the topic of consciousness. I think all of them have their temptations and their liabilities. Much of my talk, I will grant, is framed around an empirical prediction that could turn out to be false. Maybe the public will never engage in mass unironic anthropomorphism, and what we're seeing now is just a response to the sheer novelty of the technology. I think that's very unlikely. I think I'm pretty confident in this prediction, but it is a falsifiable prediction. So, have me back in 5 years and we can see how I did. But if I'm right that we'll see our folk psychological constructs soon extended to include AI systems, then rightly or wrongly, I suspect that AI consciousness skeptics may soon find themselves on the wrong side of history. Thank you.